Talk Show.
Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. This week we continue our Exorcist retrospective with Paul Shrader's Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, creator of the graphic novel Sword of Dracula. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars and co-creator of the comic Psychom from Tokyopop and Clockworks from Humanoid. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
And also from Austin, Mr. Drew Edwards, the creator and writer of the long-running comic Halloween Man from Monsterverse Comics. Say hello, Drew.
Hello.
And finally, also joining us from Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman. Say hello.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, according to Wikipedia, I'm so excited because this is going to be such a bonkers couple of weeks. Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, is a 2005 American supernatural horror film directed by Paul Shrader. It is an alternative prequel to The Exorcist, which came out in 1973. It is the fifth entry, or the fourth, as you might see it, in the Exorcist series. It was written by William Wisher, who he wrote this screenplay, and he has story credit on the next movie we're going to do, and also Caleb Carr, who was the writer of the movie The Alienist. Of the book The Alienist, which is fantastic. So what's really strange here about this movie, and we're going to go straight into people's opening thoughts, is that this is the movie that we're talking about was released after the movie we're doing next week, but it was shot first, and so we're doing them chronologically in the order that they were shot. This movie is the prequel to The Exorcist, called Dominion, directed by Paul Shrader, who was the writer of Taxi Driver, and so we're going to get to do a really great experiment where we can talk about a movie that was made and then remade immediately by a different director. But right this week, it is Dominion. So let's get our first impressions. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if this is your first time seeing it, anything else that might come up. And really, I trust you. Tony, first impressions, Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist.
Well, this is my first time seeing it, and I have come to the conclusion there are two kinds of Exorcist movies, slow and plotting and kind of unnecessary and awesome. And that's what I've seen. So we're batting 2 for 2, because this one I was bored to tears, and I spent the whole time going, wow, this has nothing for me. I could care less about anything that happened in this movie, and it really, it negates a bunch of things and it certainly makes Exorcist 2 completely pointless, even more so than before. And maybe that's the point, is we're just going to ignore Exorcist 2, and everybody wants to, even
right.
Even the director wants to, ignore Exorcist 2, and he has every right to. That's awesome. But man, oh man.
So did I hear you correctly? You said that the two kinds of Exorcist sequel are slow and plotting?
Two kinds of Exorcist movies in general.
Yes.
There's two that are awesome.
Yeah.
And there's two that I could care less about and never want to see again.
That's
and I haven't seen the fifth one, so I don't even know about that. But I haven't heard good things. But yeah, man. Oof.
All right. Okay. So far,
Tony, if I may, if you did not like this one, you would really not like the other version of this. And I will leave it at that.
This is one of the first times I'm actually glad I'm going to be at Fantastic Fest and not have to watch that movie again, because I think I would throw something through the screen.
Wow. So okay. All right. So we're going to be missing.
Drew's cryptic comments about the next movie have begun.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Julia, Dominion.
I think this movie is pretty forgettable. I didn't dislike it as much as Tony did. I just didn't really. It was kind of meh. I liked some pieces of it. I think that Stellan Skarsgård is great. And I think that Billy Crawford is such a find. He's actually a rocker, the guy who plays the kid who's possessed.
Yeah.
He's actually not, usually an actor. He's this rocker, and so I thought he was really interesting. But I mean, it was kind of like I agree with a lot of what Tony said. It's pretty slow, and then when it's not, and like the end, I found it very anticlimactic. The whole actual exorcism. Anyway, so we could talk more about that later. But yeah, it's kind of meh.
Okay, excellent. Drew, what are your thoughts?
I think I'm gonna come more around on the positive side on this one over everybody else. Especially since I am the only one here who has seen Exorcist the beginning, and I'm not going to spend the whole time comparing the two, but that is such a stinker of a movie. It's almost as bad as Exorcist 2. It's not quite that bad, but it's veering pretty close. This is very hokey. I'm not going to say that it's not hokey. It's an extremely hokey movie, and that would be my complaint about it. Because the original Exorcist is a lot of things, but it's not hokey. However, I like the period setting. I like the kind of Indiana Jones movie gone very, very wrong vibe of it, like that kind of thing. And I like to see this younger sort of, again, Indiana Jones-esque version of Father Merrin. I think that's cool. It's really the stuff that I wish there was more of in Exorcist 2. It's kind of a mixed bag. I understand a lot of the complaints, about it. But again, I didn't find it to be slow. I thought it was entertaining enough. It's not a movie I think I would go back to a lot. Like we just did Exorcist 3, and Exorcist 3 I think is a movie that I could watch that movie again now. This isn't a movie that I felt that strongly about, but I did enjoy it, for what it is.
Thank you very much. All right, my quick thoughts, and then we'll get into what exactly makes a prequel to The Exorcist. Okay, so Dominion, you have a movie here made by Paul Shrader, the guy who made Cat People, which was fantastic, who wrote Taxi Driver, who had this real sort of 70s and early 80s sensibility, and so he fits in perfectly with the time that The Exorcist is coming along, and so it seems like the right person to trust something like this to. I actually found myself liking this movie, but just feeling like it was just barely over the line into okay. I mean, this is not going to become one of my favorite movies, but I loved how it looked to me like a big Hollywood, classy adventure kind of faux David Lean sort of movie. That this very much felt like one of those big, like it should have starred Patrick, or I don't know, somebody from the 60s. It felt like Flight of the Phoenix, for instance, Jimmy Stewart, and which also had David Attenborough, actually. It had one of those, look at this big movie with these big sets and all these guys dressed like Nazis and stuff. I loved that. But, does that make it an Exorcist movie? And then what's funny is it becomes a movie that's kind of about some archaeologists who uncover this evil that starts making everybody act batshit crazy, and yet, it has to end with an exorcism because it is an Exorcist movie, which means that Exorcist movies, let's assume that they just keep making them, and every 5 or 7 years we're going to have another one. Exorcist movies are now basically like Rocky movies. They have to end in a boxing match. It's going to keep getting put off until the very end. And it turns out it's actually kind of hard to make an exorcism all that exciting. I mean, you've kind of seen the best one in the first movie, so this one is like, okay, the exorcism has begun. It's going to be very difficult. The attack will be psychological, and then it will be over. So, or like the fight scenes in Highlander, in the end that Duncan is going to walk away. So, you can almost skip over it. You can almost be like Red Digital Target. Was that the name of the anime that we watched, Tony, where the guy walks into the tower and at the end to take on the bad guys, and then he just walks back out again with the tower collapsing behind him? That would have been
great.
Great Digital Target, yes. I mean, so I actually liked this movie probably more than you guys did, but I don't know. I think to the extent that these are creating an exorcist genre, the problem is that it means that you have to live up to certain things that if it was just a regular movie about these characters, probably wouldn't have to do some of the same steps.
I will tell you one thing I liked was I really thought it was an interesting little piece, and it really has nothing to do with any horror movie. It's more of a psychological thing. That Father Marin, that we open the movie with 1944. These troops are going to murder. The soldiers are going to murder all these people, and they give Father Marin a choice of like, you can take 10 people or we'll kill everybody. Is what they're kind of saying.
Right.
And so he ends up choosing. And then I guess regrets it for the rest of his life. So at the point when he's confronted with the demon says, hey, go back and choose differently. So he gets to kind of relive that and see how it would happen. I thought that was really interesting. Like just to see, he's like, okay, this time I'm going to take the weapon and I'm going to, threaten the guy, and then that doesn't work, so I'm going to shoot him in the head, and then everybody gets killed. Yeah. So it's like, okay, so that didn't work out either. That was I think that's just a neat piece of just to have it by itself, just kind of see like how would things happen if you could do it differently.
It was very interesting. Yeah, I mean the psychological stuff that the demon says to him at the end, some of it is cool, and that whole business of let me show you an alternate way that things could go was kind of neat. We're going to get to that when we. Well,
the demon is presented very differently here than it is in any of the other movies where. It's much more lurid and about torment. I guess it's more of the seductive qualities of evil, which is different.
Younger.
maybe it's because he got his butt kicked here. He's had to change his tactics.
Yeah, he's gotten mad.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to think this is okay, so I want to talk, though, what is a prequel to because I was about to say, well, it's because it's a prequel. You have to keep thinking how they're going to change. But if somebody said to you, hey, let's make a prequel to The Exorcist,
Well, I mean, The Exorcist talks about how, this guy, Father Marin, did an exorcism back in Africa, so that's what it has to be, that one.
It could be. I'm saying, yeah, but...
Well, I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, that is what it is. But I was thinking, but what is The Exorcist? The Exorcist with a capital and a capital. And to me, what The Exorcist is a movie about coldness and Americanness and, modern America against old magic and crises of faith and stuff like that. So to me, this, I think Drew said it best, this Indiana Jones kind of picture is interesting, but it has almost nothing to do with anything that the first Exorcist movie made you feel. There's nothing like, I come out of that, I want to feel that strange vibration of fear and revulsion. It's not here.
Also, again, it goes back to, like, do we come out of, like, The Exorcist, like, after we've seen this movie, does The Exorcist 1 mean anything more than it did? Because if you can't make a prequel where the movie that you've seen before, that you get more out of it, then I think most of the time, and I'm not saying every prequel has to be this, but I think that's what you want out of a prequel, right? Yeah. Where it bolsters what you knew in the first one of the movie that you've seen before, and it furthers that lore. This really does.
Part of it, yes.
This really only dilutes the lore, and we don't need to see. Again, there's nothing about it that I was like, that's why. Like, even the Nazi scene was like, okay, I guess that makes some sort of sense, except that there's nothing to inform us anything about that in the original movie. It's just a new thing they wanted to tell, and it's fairly effective. And like Julia said, like I agree that I think there's a lot of stuff in this movie that is interesting. Like, obviously people were trying and to do something different. I think that's cool. At the point where, like, the demon shows up and he makes the Jacob's Ladder shaky face, which you've seen a million times, and just stuff like that, where I was like, really? Like, you've got good people doing stuff. And it's always, obviously, when people say, like, oh, well, the studio did this, I've heard it, we've heard it a million times. Jason and I have dealt with this on a comic that we wrote. Sometimes the thing that you set out to make does not end up being the thing that people get in their hands or in front of their eyes.
Right.
Except the problem with that is the audience neither knows nor should care what the tribulations of that. It's interesting knowledge, but at the end of the day, you've got a film that, for better or worse, whether it was, this is what we see. And the legacy of how it gets made, that's great for, I want to watch Lost in La Mancha, right?
Right.
About Don Quixote. That's interesting. Or the new Richard Stanley movie, which is about how he got taken off of Dr. Moreau. Those are interesting things. But at the end of the day, you can only hold the work up. And this work, regardless, it doesn't inform of anything else. It's very slow at the beginning. There's all kinds of interesting bits, but they don't get summed up into something where I'm like, oh, man. Yes, it's a demon. It's not. Is it Pazuzu like we were told before? It kind of sort of is. They kind of threw in some locusts eventually. But in general, there's a demon movie. In fact, again, I think the fact that it's an Exorcist movie or branded as an Exorcist movie hurts it more in the same way that I think, the RoboCop remake could have been an excellent cyborg cop movie.
So if
in fact, the RoboCop movie is bleh, I don't know,
So this movie, if I were to say, hey, there's this movie called Dominion, and it wasn't called Prequel to it. It's a movie called Dominion, and it's about a priest in British occupied Kenya who uncovers a lost Christian church that's holding down a demon that starts to take everybody over. And we watched it. Do you think you would like it better if it were presented that way?
It's still pretty messy, and I thought that it drags a lot. But I think that might make it different. That might I would forgive it a little bit more because you've got the original Exorcist, which is a really good film.
Yeah.
And 3, which is really good in a different sort of way.
No, but I wasn't comparing it to The Exorcist. I was just watching it as a film, and I actually what Drew said about it being like Indiana Jones. If you base it on that, then this is a very boring film because Indiana Jones, that's moving all the time. So you have the potential when you're discovering, this. I watch this movie and it seems like every time you see an archaeological dig in a movie, you're worried that something terrible is going to happen because of all these things. And it can, there's so much potential for just accidents to happen and all kinds of weird things that could be going on that don't, just kind of, you have just computer graphic hyenas or whatever.
Oh,
but that's about
good
it.
night.
God,
Again, they do, this is another case, I know I harp on this, but bad CG, they've got, later on, they've got a real hyena.
Yeah, why is there
CG hyenas? I don't know. The same with the cow. The CG cow looks freaking
why do you need, of all the things in the world, why do you need a CG cow?
Why
did you need
cow
eating a hyena? Why don't you just take a cow and let it lick a salt lick?
Well, and I told Jason,
a hyena.
I told Jason when they were first showing the, he's talking about the bull or whatever and how they're sacrificing, weakening and all that. It just is kind of going on and on. He's like, what is all this? And I said, it's because it's James Michener's version of Dominion because it's just we're just going to give you a lot of backstory about Africa.
Here's the thing. Yeah. They show a long shot of the cows supposedly eating hyena. Yeah. And that's fine. Then they show a terrible CG shot. Then they show what looks to be at least a practical effect, if not a cow, or something that looks practical and it's ripping flesh. And that looks good because it's a real thing. And then they cut back. Why just stop it, bad CG
why not just
people?
Cut away?
Why did you have to add the terrible, terrible cow back again? It's so weird. I don't know who makes these decisions. But if you can't afford good CG, and again, there's cuts that look great that they had no business, like the inserts of CG. And it's as a CG person and I don't even dislike CG. Again, But bad CG, when you don't need it, is crazy town. And it costs money that you could be spending on any number of other things in a movie. Except somebody wrote somebody a check, and that's kind of what got made. And it's just so crazy. Because, again, the long shot looks great. The cow ripping looks good. That I think that was even more frustrating. So what frustrated me the most was that the CG shots, again, didn't add anything. In fact, they take away. When you've got good shots that are on either side of these bad CG shots.
True. What were you
just crazy.
Well, I would have very much liked to have seen, this does play into what Tony is just saying, that, we only get what is actually released. We don't get more often than not, we don't get what the filmmakers intended. I would love to see a version of this where, with more studio confidence behind it. It's with just a few nips and tucks here and there, I actually not only think you could have had a good movie, I think you might have been able to have a great one if this had just had a little bit more, I don't even know what, but, something put into it, because there are good performances in it. It's very atmospheric. The sets, I love the sets in this movie. The church is gorgeous. And,
Absolutely.
I think
we should probably get a little bit specific about.
Well, the plot, the plot line. You were just talking about the if you were to describe this movie aside for what it's about, aside from it being The Exorcist, this priest who's also an archaeologist, and it's a little bit after World War II, and they uncover this lost temple that's holding back a demon. I would watch that movie. I would watch that movie based on the idea behind it. And biblical archaeology is a fascinating subject in its own right. So you could have made a really cool movie. And like I said, I come around to thinking that this movie's all right, but it could have been great. I really do believe it. It's as far as what it means to be a prequel, I can't really think of too many prequels that people think are 100% satisfying.
I mean, the only thing I can think of is 3/4 of Godfather 2 is really a prequel to Godfather 1. And nobody was troubled by that. It worked out pretty well. But, even that, first of all, it has more stuff in the present day that carries the story forward. And, no, you're right. I can't. Oh, wait. No, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a prequel. But
does that movie really feel like a prequel? I mean, come on. There's nothing in it that really sets up Raiders of the Lost Ark. It just feels like another. Here's Indiana Jones. He's on another adventure, and this time he's got a blonde instead of a brunette. That's really it. So if Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom succeeds where other prequels fail, it's because it doesn't really bill itself as a prequel.
Well, so we could probably go down a long track over whether or not Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom succeeds.
Well, that's a different subject for a whole other. I'll defend that movie, but that's a whole other podcast.
So the characters in this movie, just so that we recap them, because I don't want the audience to think that we're just talking in vagaries the whole time. But so you've got Father Merrin, who is Stellan Skarsgård playing a young version of the Max von Sydow character, and he has stationed himself here at this big archaeological dig, and horning in on his archaeological excavation is a British major, very, very stiff, who has a whole army with him and is interested in what might be discovered around here, and a priest who has kind of showed up to, if I can understand correctly, has showed up to do some missionary work, start a school, but also sort of check up on Father Merrin, who has been kind of in the outs with the church ever since he witnessed and even was dragged into being a part of just these Nazi atrocities in World War II. And so, and there's one more major character, at least among the white people, which is interesting because you've got this strange racial thing going on as well. So all of this is about the British Empire, of course, in Kenya. And so you've got one more among the Caucasian cast, which is you have this French lady who's a doctor who herself had, was wrapped up in Nazi atrocities. And then Rachel, of course. And then you've got the whole African cast, and they are, it's very interesting, and that's why I say this feels like a 1960s movie, because among the Africans, they're basically tribesmen, they're acting according to custom, they're keeping their old ways, and the problem is they are sharing their space with this imperial English army, and they're in constant conflict. And the moment Father Merrin starts the plot by finding this buried church, everybody starts acting out in like the worst possible ways that they can. Now, let me ask you something. Has anybody ever seen a movie that made the British Empire look more like Nazis than this movie?
They do make them like, they're not very good guys. Actually, that's one of the more interesting things is they take kind of the colonialism.
Yeah.
And here's a man who's dealt with it like, oh well, at least I'm in the British Protectorate, so things are better, even and then come to find out, nope, it's terrible. Things are tough all over.
Well,
right?
and when the demon starts to infect people, and it's almost like a Star Trek plot, basically. They open up the tomb, everybody starts acting bad. When the demon starts to infect people, the British officer starts literally acting the way the Nazi did, who shot somebody in the head when in the Dutch town that Father Merrin was a part of.
There should be an Exorcist movie that's all about how Hitler was just possessed by.
Well,
I mean, good Lord, yeah,
it does do a cool. I mean, that is part of what they're going for, is that the evil is all pervasive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who we think of as being good people can easily change. Mm-hmm. And I think those are really. I mean, there's a lot of interesting themes. The movie isn't like as much of a mess as 2 by any stretch.
Oh, I didn't even mention Che-Che.
Right.
I apologize. There's one more character, which is, of course, the maybe the least interesting character, which is the deformed boy.
No, but he's the most interesting character because he becomes possessed.
I guess so, but I found myself much more interested in the politics of this movie and the whole question of whether the British Empire is going to decide to let Kenya be self-ruled, and whether the Catholic Church has anything to atone for as far as
all that bored me is here.
All of that was way more interesting to me than whether the devil is going to straighten up this boy's leg.
No, I thought it was really neat because he's
tell us about
it. He's in the hospital because I can't remember exactly what ends up leading him to have that surgery, but what are they like? Did he get injured?
He's an outcast,
right?
And he has a crooked leg and a crooked arm,
right?
He's intelligent. He's learning English. He's the others don't like that. Superstitious.
They think he's cursed.
They think he's cursed. But why does he wind up in the hospital? He has lesions. He has sores. I can't remember what.
Well, for whatever reason, they're working on him in the hospital, and the priest who, once they open up the church, which by the way is gorgeous, I agree. Once they open up the church and everything starts going crazy, the younger priest, what's his name? The Father
Francis.
Francis. Yeah, he goes to Che-Che and says, you're the most innocent person here. You're the only one that's blessed by God. Basically, everything else is just evil and horrible. And he touches the rosary cross to his forehead, and it burns him. And then he sits up and says something demonic. and of course, that was really to me that was really interesting because it's like, even though it's probably going to, well, I know it's going to happen. I'm sure most people knew it was going to happen. But it's still interesting because he's so thinking that this is the one, good guy in the whole thing, and he's the one that's possessed. And then he's throws him across the room and all. So, I just think it's an interesting character. And I especially, like I say, like it when because then then Che-Che wants to be baptized and they take him to the church. But, of course, Father Francis is terrified because he knows that the demon is in there. And sure enough, he gets thrown across the room again. And
this church, so we should, Tony or Drew?
Okay, I would like to say one other thing about Che-Che, actually.
Okay.
I do find it very interesting. Like that he is the reverse of Reagan in a lot of respects. But when he becomes possessed, Reagan is like torn down. She's covered with like sores and scabs. She becomes hideous.
Yeah.
Cheche actually becomes better looking
Yeah, he becomes
the longer
perfect.
he's possessed. Yeah.
He becomes perfect. The way he gets his leg, he gets his arm. He like all his skin is healed. He loses his hair for some reason. I don't know why.
Honestly, I think they were trying to kind of make him look, at the risk of sounding overly, maybe reaching a little far. I think they were trying to make him look almost phallic.
Well, I think it goes with the angelic, like otherworldly. Angels are supposed to look otherworldly, and they were trying to do that. Plus the whole they do the kind of Pazuzu face from the first one from time to time.
He does
sometimes,
look like Pazuzu.
And they make him run around. I thought it was interesting. Like, there's some great set design, but I think it's funny how the artifact below the church is supposed to be very pagan, and yet looks like it was made by the same kind of Judeo-Christian sculptors that made the rest of it.
Well, that
really
actually, without spoiling too much, that is actually one of the things that is slightly improved on in Exorcist in the beginning. But I won't.
So just to answer specifically the question about special effects, a little bit about this. Hang on a second. They finished Exorcist Beginning. They finished Dominion first. Then they did Exorcist Beginning because they didn't like Dominion, and by they I mean the studio. The Beginning came out, okay, and then the studio decided, you know what, Paul Shrader, if you want to release Dominion, limited release before we put it on Blu-ray or DVD or whatever they were releasing it on at the time, so they said, okay, you can prep it for a theatrical release, limited. We'll give you $35,000 to finish up whatever's not finished. So I can almost guarantee you that they didn't have enough money to finish the shots that they needed.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's unfortunate, but yes. Where do you spend that $35,000? Do you spend it on 5 mediocre scenes?
I'm back to the which is they should just cut the stuff, you know?
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Is like what you want to do is improve everything, but you can't. Yeah. So I think maybe the answer should have been to have a really great cast party and go, hey, cast, sorry that things haven't worked out and nobody's gotten to see the movie y'all really, really worked hard on.
Yes.
Instead, we get, because again, it sucks. Like I said before, Jason and I were part of a thing where we have a character that was rewritten who has a twist and dies off within 2 pages.
The publisher,
it's one of the most frustrating.
That's true.
It's one of the most frustrating things I've ever been a part of. Is having a character that you cared about twisted into something I still think is just ridiculous. However, when somebody reads that and they go, man, that was weird, and they write a review like that, guess what? I can go on the internet and defend it and, air my dirty laundry or whatever, but it doesn't matter because the end user, that's my name on it, for better or worse. And so it's unfortunate.
You're doing that right now on the internet. This is
no. Yes, but I'm not. There's not specifics like
Oh
you can say that, whatever. But again, I can understand. My point is, I can understand.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I mean, I've been part of video games that, there's a couple. There's one in particular I made that I've design credit on, and I'm just like, oh man, can I?
It's very frustrating.
Really, you put me there?
Or when you're up on a panel, or you see a director or an actor who's up there, and they go, hey, why did this happen in this picture? Why did that happen? And sometimes they'll go ahead and go off on this long diatribe and how they didn't want that, they thought about that, they ended up having to do it. But to be honest, anytime you're explaining, you're losing.
It's awful that we have to do, that things happen like this. And again, I don't think anybody sets out to make. I would say in video games even less because just the way it is. But there's some movies that are made to be ironically dumb, and we've seen more of those lately. But in general, most people want to make something good. I would say most of the time. And so when something does get lifted or turned or twisted or whatever because of studio influence or whatever, it is really frustrating. And it's terrible. And you know, here's something you've worked on. I mean, a movie takes years or can take years.
Well, it makes me wonder, Tony, if maybe what I assume to be the trashiness of the next version of this we're going to see, which is the Rennie Harlan version, when you bring in the director of Die Hard 2 and say, please remake this Paul Schrader movie in your own image, I have a feeling it's going to be a kind of a trashy movie, and so maybe that will be better. In other words, maybe...
Actually, I like Die Hard 2, and so...
Well, I love Die Hard 2, but my point is that this is let's face it, this movie that Paul Schrader made is trying to be classy. It really is.
No, that's true, and it is a really pretty film. The pacing is what it is, but it was the exception. Yeah.
What's that, Drew?
The hokiness that I mentioned earlier, you know, the cheesy special effects and everything. This did not have to be hokey. Like, I think it's the biggest shame of it.
It commits a lot of hokey things. When he jumps up and talks to the priest after he's burned, it's almost like a Freddy type of hokiness, a later Freddy type of hokiness. There's bits where there's like one-liners, you know, that are getting like kind of shouted out, you know, oh, I'm perfection, and all this kind of stuff where you're like, wow, there's better parts of this movie than this. The end credits have a guitar riff and you hear them actually mentioning Satan in the back, which there's movies for that. But when you think of Exorcist and a score and tubular bells, and then you've got another movie where it's like, and here's the like pseudo metal, and here's Satan mentioned in the background, which, you know, some bands can pull off, and others it just sounds really stupid. And this is one of those like, oh yeah, man, that devil. But
what I'm saying though, from my perspective, I agree with you about all the special effects, and every time that happens, I sort of regret it. But at the same time, the other parts of this that remind me, again, of Indiana Jones, so much so that you expect occasionally they'll show a map with little dots moving across the line. There's just something old-fashioned about this in a really nice way, and I dig that stuff. You know, I dig seeing all the you know, stiff upper lip British. You know, when's the last time you saw a movie that took place in you know 1940s Africa? It's just not something you hit on a lot.
No, and again, I think there's a lot of I think that movie. There's a lot to be said for a movie. You could make an interesting movie, I think, out of just that, and the it wouldn't even have to necessarily have an actual exorcism, but the fact that there's a priest there who may or may not, like, should they do an exorcism on the tribe, the members of this tribe who have totally pagan views, you know, who have been there longer than, you know, maybe their views have been there longer than Christianity has existed. That kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot. Like, there's all these great bits. Maybe that's the frustrating part, is when you watch a kind of arguably poorly paced film that kind of ends with almost a late 80s kind of, you know, demon thing going on. Yeah. And it's got all this other stuff when there's a bunch of, again, there's several movies you could make that if you're going to have a slower paced movie, like the beginning of it, you can do some really cool stuff. And it kind of just gets diluted, in my opinion.
Drew, what were you going to say?
Well, you talked about the old-fashionedness. I do think, you know, this version of Maron is not actually what I imagine the young Father Maron that Max von Sydow played.
I agree.
Being
there.
like,
he's not at all doing a Max von Sydow impression. This is not like Ewan McGregor doing, you know,
Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Doing Obi-Wan Kenobi as a Guinness impression.
But I do think he's a compelling character, and sort of you talk about the old-fashionedness. He is kind of a Humphrey Bogart kind of hard-bitten, old weathered guy, and I do think he's compelling as a protagonist. And I'm kind of glad he didn't do a Max von Sydow, even though there is if you are to take this, which we should, as a prequel to The Exorcist, he doesn't. It's hard to imagine this guy growing into the Max von Sydow almost comes across as, like I said in the very first podcast we did in this, he almost comes across as part of that same tradition as Peter Cushing in the Dracula movies. He has
there are moments. See, I will dissent respectfully from that on one item, which is that towards the end of this, when, like I say, this is, in many senses, this is a Rocky movie where he's got to go back into the ring. When he finally, towards the end, puts on his priestly robes and goes back and starts doing all the recitations and stuff, he does say one thing that makes you feel like this really will pay off as a prequel, where he says something like, I will oppose you, I will always oppose you, I will oppose you to the ends of the earth. It's this very poetic thing that you do see Father Merrin.
Well, and the tribal leader says, you've pissed this demon off, and he's going to follow you.
And, within that, I can honestly actually rectify, as a continuity thing, Exorcist 2. Saying, well, maybe there was this second time he went up against this demon in Africa, the church isn't fully aware of.
Because in Exorcist 2, remember in Exorcist 2, they've got this amazing, that's a stupid movie, but there's one thing where they have this tower. They have like a temple in the sky, remember, that he has to climb up to cure the boy? I'm perfectly fine, if you want to be a purist, with saying that story takes place after this one. That he just went all over Africa saving people.
He battled demons. Yes. Well, I mean, if you want to do him as sort of a demon fighting, Indiana Jones, there's, I mean, hell, let's do a manga series of that. I'd read that.
I would absolutely read that, yes.
I mean, kicking indoors and casting out demons, that'd be great.
Yeah.
But again, this
the Young
the film
Father Merrin
got,
Chronicles.
Yeah, but the film we got is neither of those. It's a very slow-paced, what could have been an interesting kind of commentary movie, followed
I wonder
by
if maybe we will like the next one.
The original Exorcist isn't exactly fast-paced, though.
No, that's true.
But let's be fair here.
It's paced deliberately. Like I said, I don't know. When I started watching this, and I like slow movies, and I even defended, Godzilla when we talked about that, at how much slower most people wanted a movie, and I don't mind a slow-paced movie. It just seemed like it kind of, like I said, it ended up for me being neither of the movies that I kind of would have liked to have seen. And maybe that's my own, I'm bringing this into the tree, kind of thing. But I don't know. It is, again, my frustration is that you've got people who are really trying to do something really cool, and through whatever happened, we got this, which I don't think really. It's like Julia said, it's very, very forgettable.
So even if, in other words, it's not just the special effects for you. Even if you forgave the special effects problems, you still think there are pacing problems. There's
I mean the demons. Sometimes the demon's really cool in doing stuff, and other times it's like a pastiche of cliches that we've seen from tons of other horror movies that have been cliched.
Was the word you used before. That was a good word.
But I once again, I would have been really happy, I think, I think this is a prequel to Father. The thing is, I think it's a mistake to do all of this. I don't think people really wanted to see, as interesting as it might be, and as many bad things as people do here, I don't think people wanted to see this for Exorcist. To me, The Exorcist is about Washington, D.C. I think if you take the story out of Washington, D.C., you get away from what made it feel so good.
No, I disagree.
I really think this movie needs to take place in Georgetown. It needs to involve more demon stuff in America. I just kind of feel like
I'm going to agree with Julie. I would have no interest in watching essentially just a rehash of The Exorcist.
Yeah, the Africa piece is interesting. I mean, that's because of the fact that Merrin did do that exorcism in Africa. They talk. So I think that's
why
fine.
does The Exorcist have to be? I guess it's because it's The Exorcist, because it's Father Merrin.
Well, you just answered your own question.
Yeah,
but I mean, it doesn't have to be about Father Merrin. Exorcist 3 is, more or less what you're just saying you want to see. It's more stuff about Washington, D.C. It's, You know, that kind
I
of
like
thing.
the idea that this demon is worldly and he's not he doesn't belong to DC. He's all.
But what I'm saying is, the more you dig into all of this very, very specific other adventure-y kind of stuff, which is great. And again, I would love to. I probably enjoyed this movie more than most. But the more you get away from what actually I react to, and maybe other people react to in the original Exorcist, which is these are people like me in a world that I live in, and Satan is real and invading it.
But then it's not Indiana Jones anymore, and I think the Indiana Jones concept is what they're after here, which is the exotic, the fact that it's an archaeological dig. We don't have archaeological digs in D.C., you know. I mean, the fact that you're going into, like, something that's mystical, and there's all these people that are I actually think that the whole point of it is that they're people who are different from us, and yet this demon is still there. Like, he's just everywhere, and no matter where you go, wherever he goes, wherever Marion goes, that's where he's going to be.
No, it's true. I don't know.
Here's a question I had thinking about the Indiana Jones stuff when I was watching it. Were any of you bothered, or do you think, what's your take on, in the first movie we get a Pazuzu statue, right? And it represents, it comes back later. Do you think that since he sees that in part one at that particular dig site that he's at, do you think the fact that we don't see, like, we see a very, like, I mean, it's super blatant when we finally see an actual, like, white-faced, red-eyed Pazuzu statue. Like, I mean, it's pretty ham-fisted.
It's not at all. That was silly, by the way. That reminded me of that. Do you remember the stupid van painting on inside the Omen? You know, where the Omen started to show its sort of schlocky roots, where they go, well, we uncovered this, ancient, van art piece. Where?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, like, do you think that the Pazuzu statue that we saw in part one was only indicative of that dig site, and that's why it's impactful, like, and why he doesn't recognize it? Or do you think that they probably should have just had that statue?
I think continuity-wise, it probably should have just been the statue from the first movie. I mean,
unless we assume that our new theory is correct, that this is a different demon from the one that's in Exorcist.
Except it can't be.
It's not.
No, I don't think it's. I think it's the same demon in all of the movies.
Absolutely.
But what I mean is a different. Well, I guess you're right. I guess he wouldn't have to. He wouldn't have to recognize him at all.
Well, I mean, if you go off of what he's saying, what Father Merrin says in The Exorcist, maybe there isn't a legion, maybe there is just one, or maybe it's like a hive mind. I mean, you can fan wank it however you want. Another thing is the relatability, though. The relatability of the 1970s setting, that feels more contemporary to people within our relative age range because it's, a lot like what we grew up with. But, I mean, so the 40s feel a lot more exotic. But I think, to the 1990s, somebody younger, somebody probably born in the 90s, 1970s probably seemed very, very...
Oh, that's a good point. That's a very compelling point, and you may be right about that. Yeah, because you're right. Because the 40s would be just 30 years earlier than all this. This is really this will blow your mind. Okay, the story here is supposed to be a mere 26 years before the first movie, and so and it's been easily, if we think of The Exorcist coming out in 1973, that's nearly twice that period between.
Well, but consider that Stellan Skarsgård is actually 10 years older.
Oh yeah.
than Max von Sydow was when he did that.
But my point is just that we are way more distant from the first Exorcist movie. The first Exorcist movie was from 1947. Almost twice as distant.
But how crazy is it now that we exist in a Hollywood world where we've waited this long between movies, and then this movie gets immediately remade?
Yes.
We live in a world where we have a new Spider-Man when we're like, wait, why aren't you telling more of the old Spider-Man? Remakes of foreign movies that happen within a year after the foreign movie is released because, Hollywood thinks people don't want to read, and they're probably right in a lot of places, which makes me sad. But, that's always the excuse. Middle America doesn't want to read, so we're not going to release a subtitled version of that. And, I've actually, talked to people who why are you remaking this? Well, that's what we do.
I wonder if
it's
such
true.
a weird, we always hear these weird things, and I often wonder if it's really true that people won't, people won't watch a black and white movie, or people won't read subtitles.
Well, I've encountered that in several jobs where I talk about something. Oh man, yeah, I don't really like black and white movies. I won't see that. Or man, if I have to go to see a movie where I have to read, screw that.
God,
in which case I'm just like, I don't. Yeah, we're just not the same movie viewer. But again, we live in this world where the echo kind of wave is getting more and more compressed. We've got an immediate remake of this film that comes out before this film gets out.
Right.
Which is
the studio
what a
weird.
What a weird world we live in the world where previous Exorcist movies have taken so much more time between each other.
Yeah.
It's just
no,
strange.
you're absolutely right.
I think this is a good example on how money-minded Hollywood is. They feel like people know The Exorcist, and they try to come out with something that's a little more arty. And they're like, okay, well maybe that was a little too arty. Let's do the dumbed down version. We gotta play it really safe.
Interesting. And like I say, I'm holding out the possibility that I might totally wind up being just completely in love with the trashy second movie.
Jason, maybe that'll be true, and I'm gonna listen with bated breath because I won't be there. But I'm telling you, probably.
Well, unfortunately, I'm also poisoned. I'm poisoned against it, and probably poisoned on its behalf. So
I don't like that. See, that's the thing. There's a lot of people in the world that revel in bad-mouthing things, and I'm not really one of those people. I do come in to my viewing, and I don't ask for a lot most of the time. Most movies are not great. I just want to be entertained, and with this movie. Well,
I usually just want one image, just one thing that I can carry out and say, boy, that was awesome.
Well, so let's go back to our actual movie that we're talking about.
Okay.
And I want to talk about the end, because that is where you would have if you were going to have a scene like that, that's where you'd have it, because that's where you have it in The Exorcist, is the actual exorcism.
Yes.
Somebody in the chat room points out that the priest in the original sacrifices his own soul for this child, and it's stuff like that just makes it so great. In this one, you have all hell breaking loose. People are at war with each other outside the church while all this is going on. The sky is suddenly northern lightsy. I don't know what's going on there. It's really pretty, but I didn't understand it. And inside, you just got this priest just kind of saying some prayers. And the demon's like, no, not working for me, and he's floating around. And then the priest throws some holy water at him. He's like, ow, that stings. And then suddenly what? He said the right prayer because they said the
wore him
prayer.
down. He literally, we are to take from this that Father Marin's faith is so great.
But it's not. Clearly it's not, because it's just been suddenly reappeared in the last few minutes. So it couldn't possibly be. I don't know. That whole thing, just to me, the fact that all he had to do was read the prayer from the exorcism book, and that was that, and now he's gone, and it's all good. I just found that way anticlimactic.
My problem with the whole crisis of faith is mostly because my vision of Father Marin from the first movie is not of a guy that's ever had a crisis of faith.
No, I can believe that. I can believe it's a crisis of faith.
Well, I agree with Drew.
I'm with Drew, actually.
Max von Sydow just radiates a certain godliness.
But I believe in the concept of I like this concept of Rick can become a hero because he was,
Well, give somebody a hero's journey, like the crisis of faith. Again, I find this version of Father Marin compelling. He doesn't 100% sync up with
right
how I feel about Father.
And if they're not selling it, then it's their fault. It's not yours or mine. So they worked for.
But Jason, here's the problem with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
If he has according to the first movie, again, you're doing a prequel, so you're beholden to that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Like, if you're going to rewrite it, then it's a different thing. It's like the new Star Trek. Hey, it's a time thing. His crisis of faith and why he starts becoming a troublemaker, etc., is pretty much spelled out that it happened after the exorcism really did a number on him. When he talks to his superiors, they're like, oh, yeah, that thing in Africa, right?
Yeah.
They didn't go, well, didn't you learn from that thing in Africa? That's where you regain your faith or whatever. Like, there's no point where they talk about it like that.
They didn't go, did you lose your faith after that Nazi thing where all those people, where you had to choose the 10 people that would die?
Well, even if they don't mention that, I think that's extra stuff. The part that they specifically mention is the exorcism in Africa.
Yes.
Which is the crux of any...
Which supposedly nearly killed him. Nearly killed him.
Exactly. That's where he went off the rails.
Yeah.
It wasn't a previous thing where he learned from it. Also, the fact that we know for a fact it's Father Merrin, it's no one else, the stakes aren't even that high. We know he survived. We know that there's an exorcism and that there was a demon, and we know, so there's, like, it's kind of like, okay, well, we're seeing how that happened. But if you're going to go with that his crisis of faith was before that, there's really no precedent for that. If you're going to go with how the first one plays out, because they keep talking specifically mentioning that, the exorcism was at any point. Why is he out in the desert? Man, he had that bad thing that happened after that exorcism. We don't even know where he goes.
They said the exorcism nearly killed them, and they clearly did not nearly kill this guy. No, not by a long time.
He gives them some lesions, which then go away. So that's true. It's anticlimactic in that way. Go ahead, Drew.
In defense, slight defense, actually, his faith coming back so quickly, you do have the from dusk till dawn defense here, which is, if demons are real, it makes you kind of an idiot to be an atheist. So are you going to be a faithless preacher or a mean motherfucking servant of God?
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. But what occurs to me, what Tony is saying, is that the problem with the prequel is there's no surprise. I've got an echo. Does anybody?
You sound very demonic. You should start recording lines from the first episode.
Very strange. I'm sorry. So, but what the problem is, there's no surprise, and the only way that they'd be able to create a surprise would be if you came into this movie and then it somehow presented the things that happen in this movie in a way that you think that something is permanently going to be reversed. Like if they presented something where they somehow showed that depending on what happens to Father Merrin, maybe the future will be undone, or maybe the way you saw The Exorcist will be misunderstood, and then at the end he manages to survive that. In other words, to create some kind of new suspense out of what you already know, like exactly. That part two.
Which goes back to my point of, if you're not going to make it better, you're not going to play in that, what's going to happen?
Yeah. But we've got a bad echo, so we should probably wrap up anyway. We've definitely been going for our amount of time. So why don't we?
I don't hear the echo. Are you hearing?
I hear the echo. Well, now it's.
I did.
It's the echoes of the damned.
Okay. Let us wrap up. I know there's probably a lot of things we didn't touch on, like the various other characters and all of the amazing politics of the late British Empire and Africa, but. And I'm really curious about some of these characters and how they're going to show up next week. But let's go around and get our final thoughts. So let's go the same direction. Tony, Julia, Drew, and then I'll go. So Tony, final thoughts. Dominion.
I don't know how much more. I really do think that there's a lot of potential. I think it's shot really well. Great. There's some great performances by a lot of the actors. There's a lot of really cool bits about the British Empire stuff and how they're dealing with the natives, and there's a lot of interesting politics that kind of would make an interesting movie into itself. When it turns full demon, it feels really late 80s in a lot of ways, in the bad parts of kind of horror movies, which were trying too hard a lot of times. And I love 80s horror movies, but there were a bunch that were kind of really trying too hard and kind of fell flat, you know. I don't think I'd be seeing this again. It's unfortunate that the studio messed with it like they did. I mean, that's always rough. But, you know, that's unfortunately we get the movie that we see.
Yeah.
And I just don't think, I mean, especially after watching 3 again, yeah, you better do something. If you're going to make a prequel, you better make something, you know, you've got a lot to stand up to, I think. And it's really hard to, I mean, you're setting yourself up. It's really hard to do, regardless, because everybody, you know, if you're going to go with it, there's a brand, well, guess what? People are really into that brand of sorts. So you better really do something good with that brand. And that doesn't happen that often. So I'll give it, you know, thumbs up for a lot of cool bits, but thumbs down as far as a movie I'd watch, you know, with any regularity, if at all.
Yeah. Julia, final thoughts, Dominion.
Well, I'm still contemplating the question of what this film would be if it wasn't an Exorcist film, and I'm thinking that the whole business with the Christianity versus the whatever the tribal religion is that they have, and all that, because I mean we didn't really get into the fact that at one point the tribal elder goes into the little school and murders the kids that are being taught the Christian by the priest. I mean, that's like some pretty gruesome stuff. And I'm curious. I guess I wasn't really invested in the whole story of the politics and the religious politics and politics.
Well, especially because they're poisoned by the demon. So
right. So it's kind of I'm a little confused. I think the word messy. I think that Tony used that word is a great word for it, because I'm kind of like, well, that would be an interesting topic to get into, but I don't know that was what the point was of this movie. I almost feel like it was like a footnote in the movie.
Well,
you know, it's like, oh, this was going on.
You know, again, having a movie about a place that's been uncovered where at one point Judeo-Christian stuff happened, and then it was covered up, and how that originally affected the indigenous population, how they don't want it to come back, and then you've got, you know, Christians coming back and unearthing bad stuff where they're like, look, man, we were happy just having our way. Like, there's that movie too. I mean, the church and all that, the temple where they're keeping a demon underneath it, and it's affecting this tribe. Not only are the invaders, 2 different sets of invaders, Christians and you know, the British soldiers. Mm-hmm. And there's a temple which has a demon which has been uncovered. All that, like, those bits again are great. Like, that really affects stuff, but it's so convoluted and you know, which movie do you want to make?
It's really interesting, thought-provoking material, and I don't think they do enough with it because of the fact that they have to get to this exorcist part of it, and they have to deal with Marion. And so, you know, but I am, like, as the diversity, you know, person in me that is really interested in knowing more about that whole culture and what went on there and all that. So I don't know. I think it could be a different film that would be a very thought-provoking movie, but this is not it. It's like introducing these themes and not really delving into them. So, so I don't know. Like I said, I think it's kind of forgettable, but it has some potential is a good word that somebody used. But you know, it's I like Stellan Skarsgård, like I said, so that was fun. And you know, he wasn't James Earl Jones in a moth costume or whatever. What is it, a locust costume?
If only that costume had appeared. You know, our guest in the chat room said the same thing. It was missing. I mean, if you're going to throw a bunch of stuff in, how can you not have the locust costume?
Man, you're right, and I'm kind of not even being sarcastic. If the bald kid demon had actually been wearing the grasshopper headdress, I would have been a lot happier with that. That would have been awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, you know, whatever. It's got its moments. But anyway, that's all. I don't have anything else to say.
Mr. Drew, final thoughts about the movie.
You know, I like this movie. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's a movie I'm going to feel like watching again anytime. You know, the original Exorcist is great. Legion is great. This is pretty good. It's kind of hokey, but a lot of movies that I love are way hokier than this. It's definitely an interesting lesson in studio greed. And, I think, the failure of this movie is something we can actually stand to learn a lot from. And I wish that more movie studios would really take a step back and take a look at this movie and the subsequent remake of this exact same movie. It's a fascinating lesson. And I'm glad that we got to discuss this. I am actually kind of sad that I'm not going to get to discuss the second part of this, because there's even more lessons to be learned in that. But this was fun. I enjoyed talking about it, and I might find the reason to rewatch this at some point. You never know, but it's not going to be anytime soon.
Right. So my final thoughts, like Drew, I actually in the end probably like this movie more than I dislike it. I kind of like it a lot. I feel like it's like a lot of people have said, it's classy. It looks good. I mean, it's generally it's a good-looking film, except for the special effects. But and so I really just wish that they had just cut around the unfinished special effects instead of attempting to do some of these silly things. But, just beautiful shots of Africa, really neat stuff that just reminds me of a lot of 1960s, films that dealt with, like, the British Empire and stuff like that. So I like that. I like the special place that this character, Marin, occupies in this community, where he's the leader, and so he's, like, running negotiations between the tribesmen and the soldiers, even as this demonic force is, like, twisting everybody and making them do crazy things. All that is pretty good stuff. I mean, the only part really that I don't even care for is that there's nothing about this, that the brand stuff of The Exorcist is this is a prequel stuff is what actually takes away from the movie as opposed to adding to it. So I like the film. What I might like the trashier one next week even better, because we'll be allowed to just throw things to the wind. Maybe it won't turn out to be that trashy, so who knows?
Jason.
Well, we'll find out.
Ever the optimist.
Yes.
Oh, you with the cryptic comments.
Okay. Listen, first of all, thank you to the chat room for joining us and for sharing your thoughts and observations and discussing it. And I hope that you come back and bring your friends. Everybody listening, please send links around, share.
Are we not doing endorsements?
Oh, gosh, we didn't do endorsements.
How could you, Jason?
Oh, my God. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. I think this is like our 107th episode, I have never forgotten to ask for endorsements that I remember. So maybe I have. So we'll just do it.
The power of endorsements compels you.
Oh, my God. Yeah, if only we had a post, we could just clean that up. But there's no post. So, team order. Tony, do you have anything to endorse this week? God, I'm such a moron. I'm sorry.
No.
Yeah, Drew?
No,
How do I have anything to endorse? I thought you were going first.
Yeah,
Tony.
Tony's going first.
Me?
Yeah.
I have a couple things, actually, and I'm sad that I will be missing next week. I'll be at Fantastic Fest here in Austin, but that should give me a bunch of new endorsements later on about movies you should see from all over the world, and that's going to be cool. My endorsements this week from Netflix are The Story of Film and Odyssey, which is a 15-part, if I'm not mistaken, series documenting the history of film, and it's pretty awesome. I've already seen a ton of older, especially silent films that I really, really need to see from directors that I haven't been exposed to except through maybe like the Draft House and a few really hardcore cinema friends of mine. I also endorse, and it's really great. Like I'm totally hooked. I also endorse a movie called Rigor Mortis, which is on Netflix. Which is, if you're fans like I am of Chinese vampire movies, this reunites many of the living people, actors, and cast and crew and everybody from previous Chinese vampire movies. I will caution you, my thought on this is to stop the film when you think it ends the first time and not see the ending, which made me want to throw things at the screen when I saw it at Fantastic Fest, I think, last year. It's got one of my least favorite things that happens at the end, and I was just super PO'd. So I can't remember. I should post, I should find the exact moment where you should stop the film and enjoy the film, in my opinion, and post that somewhere so that, you can watch it all, but I strongly caution you to cut it at some point because I just was livid. But it's great seeing these actors. It's it's more dark than a lot of the Chinese vampire movies, like Mr. Vampire and a few others. It's done in definitely a darker fashion, but man, is it great to see so many of my favorite people from Chinese genre, especially horror, in this film. It's rigor mortis, and if you're like-minded, if you trust our endorsements previously, I really, really think you'll dig this one. So I was really happy when I saw that it came up on Netflix recently because I don't have a Blu-ray or anything of it, and so I need to because it's cool.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Julia, any endorsements for us this week?
Well, I'm still in my Doctor Who binge watching.
You're watching your way through the entire.
Yeah, it's so great.
Doctor,
Such a good
yeah.
show. Oh my gosh! And the new series, the new season is excellent for anybody who's just now joining, who's contemplating joining the Doctor Who fandom world. Get into the new season first, and then go back and watch the other ones once you're hooked. But it's so great. It's so great.
Yeah, people are calling this most recent episode of Doctor Who, which I haven't even seen,
fantastic.
one of the greatest episodes ever.
It is so good. Absolutely great.
Very cool. Mr. Drew, any endorsements for us?
Well, on Comixology, there was a sale on the Mark Waid Daredevil, which I actually previously, I'm just going to come out and say I hated Daredevil as a character. I thought he was stupid. I thought it was a great costume, but he with no identity of its own. He was either a ripoff of Spider-Man or a ripoff of Batman, and there was no real flavor of him. Mark Waid has come in and he's completely saved this character for me. In the best way to describe this is he's really focused on the sensual, which really makes sense, no pun intended, for a character that's all about either his lack of sight or the fact that his other senses are so amped up to compensate for that. And the way he writes this character is this sort of, again, sensual crime fighter is fascinating. He's made Matt Murdock a foodie, which is awesome. He's instead of, it's still dark, but it's for once the urban vigilante is kind of having fun in the dark, and I think that keeps him away from being Batman or the Punisher, and I really like this reinvention of Daredevil, and it's like I said, it's absolutely saved the character. I love Daredevil now. He's catapulted from being a comic book character that I just thought was completely idiotic to being probably one of my favorite Marvel characters now. I highly recommend it. But I should also, since I'm mentioning Comixology, the new issue of Halloween Man is out. It's got a brand new story, but for those of you who keep demanding it, it does also have the origin story represented for you. So here's your jumping on point if you have not been reading previously. So that's going to be live, and it's only $1.99, and it gets you 60-something pages. So it's a good deal.
That's outstanding. I can't wait to read it. I've been reading Halloween Man. I'm really enjoying it. So my only endorsement actually this week is I've been binge watching the same thing that Joya has, but I did watch. I've been exploring the back catalog of Netflix a lot, and looking at haunted house movies because we probably have another haunted house retrospective coming up. I think sooner than you may think. And I came across this movie called The Comeback that just blew me away because I had never heard of it. I love finding movies that are just a complete mystery to me. The Comeback is a 1978 British horror movie starring Jack Jones, the guy who sang the Love Boat theme, and he plays a rock and roll star whose agent puts him up in this big Gothic castle so he can write his latest masterpiece, and hilarity ensues. It's a straight up horror slasher thriller with a mystery, and is it trashy? Maybe. It's 1978. You will not regret watching it. And I will, if you're wondering, if after you watch it you're like, Jason, out of all the movies in the world, why did you promote this strange movie? Well, I'll come up with more just like it, because I really, really love digging up just completely forgotten chestnuts of horror.
We should do that then. It sounds like at some point, as well as because I love rock and roll and horror. That's awesome. And
absolutely.
I think we all agree at some point we need to do Count Yorga.
Yes.
So need to do Count Yorga. Yes, I've only started rewatching
I think we
Count
should
Yorga.
do the 2 Count Yorga movies and the 2 Dr. Phibes movies as a set.
I'm down with that. I got to tell that the audience, probably for our whole Halloween thing coming up soon after we're done with The Exorcist, we're probably going back to spooky movies of the haunted house kind, and I can say that with complete confidence because it's going to be awesome. Okay. So now I'll do this stuff. If you guys have, thank you once again to the people who are in the chat room. Thanks for giving us your suggestions, especially the orphanage. I think it's a great idea. We haven't done it yet, and we might do it during the haunted house. If you're listening, leave us a review. Review us on iTunes. It helps people find the show. Send links to your friends. Ask us questions. Make more recommendations. We want to hear from you. You can find us on Twitter at Castle of Horror P, which is weird, but that's what our Twitter account is. And we look forward to hearing more from you all week. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.
Night.
Night.